totally fine. I will say too, unfortunately, Scott got summoned to jury duty. So Scott is unable to be here. But I'm gonna go ahead and cover the parts that he was going to go over, just in case. I will not do it as well as he did. But I still want to make sure that his awesome stuff gets discussed. And we'll go ahead and I'm gonna turn it over to Hannah to go ahead and go over your outcomes and the session or the part of the session that she wants to talk about.
Thank you so much. So welcome to the lovely people that joined us today. So these learning outcomes we have on here is just to discuss what you would get out of this presentation, such as define student engagement, identify different forms of student engagement in and out of the classroom setting, and promote student engagement opportunities to your students as well as fellow staff and faculty members. So we're going to start off with my section, like Morgan said. So I'm just going to talk to you briefly about what student engagement is with campus activities and how you can promote it and different examples of it. So first of all, what is student engagement? Well, thank you so much for asking that question in the chat. Really appreciate it. So according to Ed Glossary, in education, student engagement refers to the degree of attention, curiosity, interest, optimism, and passion that the students show when they are learning or being taught, which extends to the level of motivation they have to learn progress in their education. Generally speaking, the concept of student engagement is predicted on belief that learning improves when students are inquisitive, interested, or inspired, and that the learning tends to suffer when students are bored, dispassionate, disaffected, or otherwise disengaged. Stronger student engagement or improved student engagement are common instructional objectives expressed by educators. So me, Megan, and Scott really thought that this kind of hit home for what we like to do in terms of student engagement inside of the classroom and outside of the classroom. So that just gives you like a general topic of what this is. So these are just different examples of student engagement that I wanted to talk about. This doesn't limit to what we have, but it's noted that if students do participate in campus activities, it can have a positive effect on their future career. Having these activities can help distract them from their busy school lives and encourage better performances in the classroom. So these are just some examples that I wanted to touch with. So with Monty Fest, which is our end of the year celebration that we have here, it was our first time that we had it last year and it was a major success. So we will be doing that again. The reason why we wanted to encourage students to attend this more is because we saw a lot of students engaged with not just the people there that were putting it on, but also students as well. Some students met for the first time, or some students were like, hey, you're from my biology class or something to that effect. So it's just like a nice opportunity to get students away from the classroom setting and just to have a good time and be like, hey, school's almost ending. Let me go ahead and, just have a celebration for them. Also, this is not the flyer for this year because at the last session I kind of wanted to showcase like last year's stuff just as an example. So Student Appreciation Day, which was yesterday, for those of you who stopped by, thank you so much for stopping by. We really do appreciate it. And if you sent your students, we also appreciate you very much. It went very well. So with that being said, because you all were able to send students, you were letting them be engaged with on-campus activities, and I really, really appreciate that. They were able to build a Monty, Dave and Buster's was there, and we had some free food, which also there will be some more food in the lobby. We do have some leftovers that we will be sharing, so if you want to tell your students, hey, there's going to be more free food in the lobby, feel free to do that. Stress less week, again, that's another thing that I really love students trying to, not be so stressed with finals because we know that students are very stressed the week before finals. So we want to try to shine a light on some different activities to help them not be so stressed out. But I do want to take a moment to talk about what didn't work with stress last week, such as the ornament painting. So a couple of students, when I asked them like, hey, how come, like, I want to get your opinion as to why there's not that many students here, because I only had like 4 students paint. And they said probably because it starts at a later time instead of an earlier time, which, I mean, that's fair. The reason why I kind of wanted to start in the afternoon was so like it could be open to all for a specific amount of time. But I took that and I decided to start events earlier. So because of that, I was able to see a growth in my events, which I will touch on later. and also welcome week events that we have. So these are just like top ones that are very campus like involved. And that's centered around, for all students, which again, all of my events center for all students, but this is more of a like very student centered, like stress less week. We want to help you de-stress before finals. Student appreciation day. We want to appreciate the students. Welcome week, welcome to class. And then also Monty Fest. Hey, class is over. Congratulations. So those are the ones that I just wanted to list off for different engagement activities that we will have throughout the year. Um, so the purpose of this, I just wanted to touch on, like, why do we do this? What is our purpose? And of course, the students are the purpose of why we do this. Campus activities give students a chance to speak with their peers, have conversation with staff and faculty, and get to know the overall atmosphere of college. Um, just having simple conversations with these students at these events have done wonders for me, in my personal opinion. Because when I have these one-on-one conversations with students, I'm able to ask them, like, what would you like to see on campus? What didn't you like about this? Just kind of pick their brain. One thing that I do in orientation is, hi, my name is Hannah, and I'm here to make you uncomfortable, right at 8 o'clock in the morning. So that the students are why I'm here. Without students, I wouldn't have a job. Without students, I probably wouldn't have a job. But Josh Keck did make a point at the last one. He's like, well, I teach to an empty room of students sometimes, which is fair. But communication with students to know what they would like to see and what is important. And I've taken note to what students wish to see on campus. Like I said earlier, earlier start times, later event times to events, and more hands-on activities. When I say hands-on, I mean more crafts. I did have a lot of students come to me and ask for different hands-on crafts. That's why I wanted to do bracelet making this semester, which was very, very popular. And also these jars of positivity that I did for Welcome Week. That was one of my most well-attended Welcome Week events. And it's just folding paper. That's all that it is. It kind of gets their mind off of a lot, and they were able to actually craft them into stars. And we were doing like how-tos for that. So people had jar of stars, which I thought was really, really cool. And I was able to actually sit down one-on-one with these students and ask them what they would like to see on campus. And so I am implementing that as I go throughout the year. Okay, so how can you, staff and faculty, promote more student activities on campus? Well, I'm glad you asked, because here are some examples. So we do have an Office of Student Services and Campus Life Facebook page for announcements, and encourage your students to follow that account. So it's just a simple Facebook group. They don't have to answer any questions, because a lot of Facebook groups tend to say, like, please answer this question below. It's just an automatic thing. We not only announce student events, but we also like post different community service opportunities for those students who are like invest students. So they actually have to have community service for their grant that they have. And we also post job opportunities that we know of in the area, and also community events. So I highly recommend that you have your students follow that page. You can take 1 to 2 minutes of class time, preferably in the beginning, to let your students know what's happening on campus and encourage them to attend. I'll use myself as an example. When I taught at Moorhead, I worked in their advising department, but I was responsible for teaching a first-year seminar class. And what I would do at the beginning of each class was tell them what events were happening on campus. And that proved very effective, because some of the students that were, they're freshmen, they have no idea what's going on campus. And when I encouraged them to go to these events, they did so, and then they would let me know in class, like, hey, I went to that thing at the student center that you told me about, and it was really fun. And I'm like, great, keep doing that, because there's gonna be a lot of different activities that are happening on campus. It only takes like not even 5 minutes of your class time, if that. Or like 1 to 2 minutes, like I said earlier. But maybe you can stop by of those events, even if it's just for 5 minutes, just kind of passing through, so that students will take note of your presence, because, that will speak a lot of volumes, in my personal opinion. And also email them reminders. We do have a student newsletter that goes out the second Monday of every month. So encourage your students to keep an eye on that, because it also will have a list of all the events that will be happening. We also have an event calendar on our website, which is under the student activity section. It should be updated for all of the different events that are happening on campus. And if you promote like yourself, that might be that. Sorry, I'm getting tongue tied. Also, if you promote the events yourself, that might be the push that they need because, faculty members like saying, hey, this is happening. They might be like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Thank you so much for reminding me that. So we can only do so much, but a little goes a long way. So I have to tell myself that like I can only do so much with attendance of events, and just if I'm able to change like one life or have one student have a great time, I feel like that's very beneficial for me. So it's just a little bit goes a long way. So just wanted to shine a light on how you can promote campus activities.
Before we continue, does anyone have any questions for Hannah about student engagement on campus outside of the classroom before we transition to some things that are happening inside of the classroom?
Please ask away. It is perfectly fine. I don't bite.
Okay, well, if you do have questions, by all means, feel free to drop those in the chat. Unfortunately, I am not Scott Beane, but he has been summoned to jury duty, so he is unable to be here on the call today. But he was, part of this team, and he did a lot of the work for the in-person session on Monday. So I'm going to go ahead and hit some of the highlights that he talked about because he made a lot of really good points, and I want to make sure that everybody is still able to hear all of that, even if he himself is not able to be here. And if you yourself do any of these things as I'm going through these different bullet points, by all means, chime in the chat or you can use your microphone. Either is fine. We had a lot of really good discussion on Monday, and I have no doubt we could do that here too. So the first thing that Scott notes is that he comes to class early and stays a little late because it opens up chances for questions and general conversation. Um, I can say that I do this too. I go to class 5 minutes early at least, and I am always the last one out of the room, which can sometimes be like a little weird, because the students are like, "Why are you trying to watch me leave?" But that gives you an opportunity to ask them questions. They get an opportunity to ask you questions. Example questions that Scott uses are, "How are you? Did you do anything fun over the weekend?" Or "How are your other classes going so far?" Anecdotally, he mentioned having asked that lattermost question and like a student saying something like, "Oh my God, I'm going through X," talking about studying or just kind of getting an opportunity, maybe not to vent, that might be kind of an aggressive word, but instead to, talk about their experience and then get some advice and feedback from someone who's been in that position before and is now an instructor. That really gives them an opportunity to connect, and to talk about things that are going on that are fun outside of the classroom, especially on those Mondays when people don't really want to be there. Let the class know a little bit about you. So Scott says that, when he introduces himself on that first day of class, he doesn't just talk about his professional life. And I think that that's a really good way to go about that as well. It's great for the students to know where you got your BA, your MA, your terminal or non-terminal degrees or your publications. But outside of that, who are you as a person? So Scott mentions that he tells his students about, what he does for fun, whether or not he has, kids and pets and what his interests are. Because if a student has a shared interest with him, then that gives them an opportunity to open up. He spoke specifically too about like his office and his personal interests. Like if you walk past Scott's office, there's Pokemon on the back window. He's got some Power Rangers stuff. I want to say he has a Mega Man poster as well. And if students are hearing him talk about those things in class, even if briefly, that gives them an opportunity to really create that kind of connection, if they are into those things as well. Or if you see a student wearing like a t-shirt for a sports team that you like, then you could comment on that and really begin to build that rapport as best you can. That way they understand that you are a person, and not just, the person that stands in front of the classroom and talks about things that they may or may not be super invested in. When possible and appropriate, Scott says to also incorporate examples from your own life when explaining a concept. So he talked about it, of course, in the context of public speaking. If he's talking about something bombing, something not working, a general kind of anxiety, if he's had that experience before, he'll talk about that and connect that to the thing he's going over in class that day. That way, they're seeing a professional in this field talk about bombing. So if they themselves have some anxiety about it, well, they can see that in his everyday life, he did the same thing. So they're learning more about him, but they're also learning more about the concepts they're going over and kind of working to humanize that a little bit more. And Scott says the goal of these things is for the students to see you as relatable, which in turn makes them more comfortable in engaging in class and asking questions, right? If we seem like these very closed off, kind of, super ultra professional monoliths, then they're a little bit less likely to answer or ask questions. And we want to make sure that they are as engaged as they can be. Next, he says use multiple teaching strategies to engage all types of learners. He himself said that he's a visual learner, so he tries to keep that in mind whenever he is teaching. He also notes too that while lectures can't be avoided, he said that when he's been lecturing for like 3 or 4 days straight, students start to tune out a little bit. And I imagine that some of you on this Zoom call might have experienced the same thing. I know that I have as well. I also note too that if I'm going into a lecture and I'm like, oh God, I hate talking about this, it's so boring, the likelihood that those students also think it's boring is probably pretty high. So we do want to make sure that we are incorporating more than just lecturing. He notes that it can be tough on your vocal cords, which is definitely true. I know at the end of the first week of class in August every year, my throat always hurts because I'm not much of a talker outside of work. So being able to not just incorporate more learning strategies, but also be a little more gentle on your vocal cords is definitely a positive. He says to incorporate both solo and group activities when possible, and to also show videos that are related to what you're teaching. He does note that TED Talks are good. I agree, cosign. I know several folks in the English department, in addition to me, use those. But he does say as well that he's found a lot of humorous content and some animated stuff that he tries to incorporate, because specifically, to borrow some of his wording from Monday, that's stuff he doesn't do. Right, like he himself is not an animated character. He cannot make those same effects, make those same images happen. But if we are incorporating something that is a little bit more fun, a little bit more lighthearted, but still connected specifically to the topic about which, you're going over that day, then not only are they more likely to be engaged, but again, they start to see everything as content that matters, not just in the classroom, not in that vacuum, but outside of it as well. And it's always good to engage them in things that they find entertaining. I've heard people say at conferences before or in conversations with colleagues, like, I'm here to teach. I'm not here to be, entertaining. I'm not here to make sure they're having a good time, which on the one hand, sure, like I get that. But on the other, as somebody who does absolutely make a fool out of herself in front of the class all the time, it really does help to drive that engagement if they are having a good time as much as they can, right? There's only so much of a good time you can have when you're talking about like oral citations, but when you're trying, right, they definitely notice. And he notes, let students know what is going on around campus. He says, I often start my classes with announcements where I tell them about events being held on campus, because if they are engaged on campus outside of class, they are a lot more likely to be engaged in class. Hannah said something similar earlier, right? Studies do indicate that the students that are very involved on campus are a lot more likely to succeed in their classes as well. I can definitely attest to that with the Creative Writing Club. The president of the Creative Writing Club from last year ended up becoming the student body president and was like involved in literally everything. And now she's so busy all the time. But when we have that kind of engagement outside of the classroom, you get it in the class as well. And speaking of, he writes, if possible, bring your class to attend an event. So for him specifically, right, as somebody who works in the communications department and is teaching people how to publicly speak, he says that if there is a public speaker, somebody who is here to talk on campus, he will bring his class. If the class is a little bit ahead in content, or maybe they've got a lighter load that day, I've done something similar to make sure that you're still doing what you need to do that day. For instance, the day of the Black History Month event that we had last month, I had like a 50-minute class like right beforehand, and I really wanted to make sure students had the opportunity to go. So I said, all right, we're going to work for 30 minutes instead of 50. We have this specific goal. If we can all meet it, then you are free to go get food and go to this event. And it worked really well. And I saw like half of them there. So being able to, if you can, bring your class to attend an event or encourage them to go, give them a little bit more time to attend, can be really helpful. I had students in my class on Monday talking about Student Appreciation Day and how they really wanted to go because they didn't get to build a Monty last year because they were in class at the time and they ended up running out before the student was able to get there. And there were others who were saying, oh, I'm driving to campus just so I can do this. So giving them the opportunity to get out of class and go to those events, if you can, really can help. I wanted to co-sign what Scott was saying there for sure. Next, he says encourage open discussion as much as possible. After I explain a concept, I often ask students to give examples they've seen in their own lives or out in the real world. He also incorporates a lot of raise your hand if this applies to you questions, because we are going to have students who don't want to talk, and that's fine, right? Some of us on this call may have been that student. I was that student. I don't call on students because I'd had that done to me and I absolutely hated it. But having questions like, okay, does this apply to you? All they have to do is raise their hand. They don't have to be super personal, but they're still engaged. They're still participating. And he says, if a student has the courage to answer a question and is wrong, try to gently steer them in the right direction, or at least acknowledge that you can see where they are coming from. As somebody who reads a lot of literacy narratives, like students talking about their relationship with reading and writing and how tumultuous that can be, often they talk about, being told from like, by a teacher, this is wrong, and maybe not getting a whole lot of explanation as to why, or being very personally affected by that because then they feel stupid. And that's not super helpful, right? We can, even if they're being very loud and very wrong, we can gently steer them in the right direction and help to, not just drive engagement, but also have a larger, nuanced conversation about whatever's going on in that class that day. Next, he says stay in touch outside of class. If you notice a student has missed several classes or assignments, it never hurts to shoot them an email and raise a flag. So doing both of those is incredibly helpful. I know I send flags. I have like 4 or 5 dates throughout the semester where I'm like, okay, I'm going to go do this thing now. It is super helpful. Mike has mentioned several times a situation where in which a student was preparing to drop a class because they couldn't see their grades in Blackboard. They didn't know how they were performing. They were getting really nervous, but because they did get communication from both the staff and faculty end, that student ended up staying, they didn't drop the class, and they passed. So being able to have that consistent communication is super important. He also notes, if I teach a particularly important lesson, I always make sure to record it. Afterwards, I send an announcement to the class reminding them to watch the recording if they were absent. So we are, especially at a community college, right? We're going to have non-traditional students that have kids. Those kids are going to get sick. Those kids are going to have snow days. We're going to have jump starters who are out in counties that get adversely affected by flooding. I mean, everybody's adversely affected by flooding, but like there's going to be a little bit more intense depending on where they're located. A lot is going to happen, right? Life happens. We want to make sure that these students are still able to engage with what we're going over, even if they're not able to be present in the classroom. And then he says, encourage students to utilize your office hours. Questions about assignments are great, but even stopping by to say hi makes them more comfortable with you. I would also note, too, that if you can put a sign on your door talking about that, the fact that you are in your office hours or you're currently busy or maybe you're in a meeting, it's super helpful for students to know where you are and if you are totally cool to be approached at that moment. I will leave my door open even outside of my office hours and it will say currently busy, but if my door is open, students will still come in and that's fine. It's only not fine if my door is shut. And even then, if it's cool for them to come in, I'll write on my whiteboard, hey, just knock if you need anything. So if you've got some kind of physical note on your door saying, I am absolutely open right now, or no, sorry, I'm kind of busy at the moment, that can help to provide additional context for them. His next section says, be flexible and understanding. It's important that we maintain rigor, obviously, but it's also important to have grace with our students and provide chances to make up assignments within reason. So one thing that he mentions is that for major speeches, right, everybody has to do a major speech. They can't get out of that. Those major assignments are something everybody has to do. But for those other assignments, he does allow alternatives if a situation calls for it. If a student misses something, but they can record their speech and prove that, I'm in front of my family. I still have, people to watch me do this thing, then he will still accept it. So being able to have kind of that level of flexibility as opposed to looking at the course as no, you have to do it this one specific way, and that is it. If they've got that flexibility, then they're a lot more likely to be more comfortable. And then relate your course content to the real world whenever you can. This is, of course, connected to, concepts of high impact practices. Like I've said before, not looking at your work as something that exists within a vacuum. Scott writes, students become more engaged with the material if they can see how it will benefit them outside of a class or in their chosen career. And if a student can apply what they're learning to their own life, they will be more likely to understand that concept. Because we're going to have students that come in and engage with our work and have never heard some of our terms before. To use an English example, we talk about rhetorical situations. And when I ask students, if I say the words rhetorical situation, do you understand what that means? And usually they're like, nah, I have no idea what that means. But when I say, okay, do you know what a genre is? They'll be like, yeah, absolutely. We'll go through different genres of music, for instance. I'll introduce them to the concept of genre conventions. So, like, what makes a country song compared to what makes an 80s hair metal song an 80s hair metal song. And they, kind of come to the understanding of, oh, I know what a genre is. I get this. And then I say, yeah, rhetorical situations are like the exact same thing. And then they get it. But being able to connect it to something they've seen in their real life, something they know already, they're a lot more likely to understand that concept after the fact if we can make that connection. Now, he does write here in bold, anecdotally, I have had more difficulty engaging students this semester than I have in previous semesters. To address this, I am doing the following. Number one, taking a long, hard look at my assignments. I don't want to make them easier per se, but I do want to get back to the basics and avoid anything unnecessary. One thing he mentioned on Monday was we might be doing something that worked 5 years ago that does not work now. And that is insanely frustrating. I get that, but we have to be flexible. We have to consistently evolve. We've been doing all of this conversation about like assessment and things of that nature, but that's kind of what assessment is meant to drive, right? If we're thinking about, okay, this didn't work, so now I'm going to do this, we really need to be thinking about, making sure we're getting these basics and we are avoiding things that might be at this point superfluous. Number two, making sure my students have ample time to work on major assignments. I also remind them multiple times in class and via email of any upcoming due dates. Cosine, fantastic idea. Students, especially those coming right out of high school or those who are in high school. When I first started teaching the Jumpstart students, that was kind of not a gripe that they had, but that was a constant observation that they made was that in high school, they're constantly told, this is your deadline, remember your deadline. And they get it like every day or every other day. And in college, they may not be getting that same kind of reinforcement. We don't have to be on them all the time, but it is helpful when they have consistent reminders. I myself start every single class period by pulling up our weekly schedule and reminding everybody, hey, here's where we are. So it is nice when they know situationally where they are in a semester and what due dates are coming up. Three, I've added optional workshop times, but the results haven't been as great as I hoped. Going forward, I am going to make them guided workshops with specific goals in mind, and they will be mandatory. Speaking of mandatory, he also says, I used to encourage my students to show up to class by saying something along the lines of, quote, you never know when there will be a graded in-class assignment, unquote. I am going to change that to, quote, every day there will be a graded in-class assignment, unquote. Ultimately, I'll be adding more participation points to my classes. I plan to do this by adding more activities, doing in-class quizzes, and answering questions of the day at the beginning of class. So largely low stakes. Attendance is something that I'm going to chime in here too, anecdotally. I've also heard folks talk about it. I have a very small in-person class, the one in-person class I'm teaching this semester, and they're okay most of the time. But it is pretty consistent across the board that attendance has been an issue. And this is a way to handle it, is to kind of let them know that, like, hey, we're doing things in person or like, attending through Zoom is still attending. So you don't have to have a body in the room if it's a flex class, but making sure they understand the importance of being there to really get those concepts. And then finally, I've talked to other professors who've had similar issues in their classes to see what they're doing. Just by preparing for this session, I've picked up some great ideas from my two co-speakers. When I poked my head in on Megan, Scott, and Hannah's meeting, as they were preparing to put this session together. Scott mentioned it then as well that he'd already gotten some really, really good ideas. I myself have gotten some really good ideas based on the things that they've gone over. I'm really excited for you guys to hear what Megan is going to be talking about here in a moment. But being able to have those conversations with your peers about what's working and what's not working, to reinforce what Scott said on Monday, we're a team. It is going to be a team effort to make all of this work. So being able to have that consistent communication is certainly important. And he reiterates that in his takeaways section, where he writes, if you're having trouble engaging students, you are not alone. Talk to your peers to get their ideas. It also helps to build rapport amongst faculty and staff, too, if we're just talking about things that we are encountering, stuff that frustrates us, stuff that's working. If you have something that worked really well and you want me to put it in the CETL newsletter, I'd be happy to do that. But talking to your peers is a great way to go about not just fostering community for students, but also for us as well. Number two, be open-minded to change. Just because it worked in the past doesn't mean it's going to work now, right? We have to meet these students where they are, especially the ones coming out of or still in high school. I have two 10th graders in an online class that I am teaching right now, and that is absolutely a learning curve for both of us. So I understand that entirely. Number three, don't be afraid to try new things. Oh, no problem, Kendra. Thanks for coming. Don't be afraid to try new things. If something doesn't work, modify it or throw it out, then try again. If you are bombing actively in a class, I've told students that I'm actively bombing and made jokes about it if a thing's not working. And students tend to think it's pretty funny. So just acknowledge that it's happening and move on. Number four, share the wealth. If you're doing something successful or successfully, let your peers know. And then finally, try not to get discouraged. Remember, you are a good professor, which is why you were hired in the first place. Teaching college classes can be challenging, but you have the skills and knowledge to meet these challenges. Again, I really wish Scott was here because he was absolutely really being like a hype guy yesterday for everybody, which was excellent. And all of these sentiments I 100% agree with. All right, I am going to go ahead and turn this over to Megan. And Megan, to make sure that you are able to, well, actually, never mind. I was going to have you share your screen, but I can just leave this up here and I can toggle between your slides for you if you do not mind. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right, thanks. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I think Scott had a lot of really great ways to increase engagement in a lot of different types of courses. And I wanted to share with you just one specific thing I've been trying in my classes that I think has been hugely successful and has really increased engagement in my classes personally. So that is cooperative quizzing, which just to give you some context, like I think we've all experienced having classes that are really hard to get students like present there, actually like participating in the class. And so I've been looking for ways to try to get students more engaged. But I heard about cooperative testing at the IPED conference at Marshall maybe like 2 years ago, and kind of laughed it off because I was like, yeah, right, cooperative testing, like I'm not letting my students take tests in groups because that's not going to work. But then I ended up going through a little professional development course where we learned about different evidence-based instructional practices, or EBIPs, and cooperative testing was one of them. And so as I looked at the literature and started kind of researching cooperative quizzes, it was actually very obvious that this is a great practice to use in your classes to get not only engagement, but I'm also really interested in cultivating a sense of belonging in my students. You probably have the same problem that students, I have a lot of students that just feel like they're out of place here and they're not quite sure if they belong. And so I really want to make sure they know that they are here and we want them here and they belong here. But then there's also, academic benefits. So cooperative quizzing has been shown in several cases to help students remember course material later because they are having active discussions about that material during class. So I just wanted to share with you the logistics of like how I've done cooperative quizzing. I've tried 2 different types of cooperative quizzes. Last semester, I tried a 2-step cooperative quiz, which is kind of like a mid-stakes. That's kind of what I called it. So I replaced like 5 exams within the course. I replaced those with just cooperative quizzes every week. So it still had a significant impact on students' grades, but it wasn't quite as stressful as exams. And so I'll tell you what I did for those. This semester, I kind of modified that to be much more low stakes and relaxed cooperative quizzes. And so I'll tell you how I do those too. All right, so 2-step cooperative quiz is actually probably the more traditional way to do cooperative testing. With this, the way I did it, the 2-step is, the first step is every student will take the quiz or the test individually, and then students will take the same test or quiz in groups. So those are the 2 steps. What I did for this is I would take the average of those 2 quiz grades, and the kind of caveat was that if I was going to take the average of those 2 quizzes, students would have to get a 60% or better on their individual quiz. So generally, when students did this, again, they would take the quiz individually, they'd take the same quiz in groups. Generally, the group averages were higher. So then if I would take the average of those scores, then students get a higher grade on their quiz than they would have if they just took it individually. But with the caveat that students have to get a 60% or better on their individual quiz, that helped hold them accountable for actually studying prior to the quiz. I was worried about having groups where one student was doing all the work and another student was benefiting, and so having that requirement in there, I think, helped prevent that from happening. My students reported that they loved this. They loved the group quizzes. And most of the time, honestly, everybody got to get the average and everybody got a good enough score on their individual quizzes to get that group boost. So the kind of logistics of like what I was doing here, I gave my students a quiz every week. It was at our first meeting of the week, right at the start of class. And so, I foresaw a problem that students would be late sometimes, students would be absent sometimes. If they were late or if they were absent, they didn't get to take a quiz with their group. So they had to schedule a makeup quiz and they wouldn't get that group quiz boost. I did have tardiness, I did have absentees. I looked at the averages and I do think that this actually helped slightly with attendance. So on quiz days, I did have better attended classes than non-quiz days. So I do think that helped a little bit getting students there because they didn't want to miss their quiz and they also wanted that group boost. I had students working in groups of 2 to 3. In the literature, this was kind of what was recommended if you're going to do cooperative quizzing. Pairs are really ideal. A third person can sometimes feel like a third wheel in those situations. But groups larger than that, in the literature, some people reported that you just end up having students that don't contribute. I did, for the first half of the semester up until midterm, students got to work in a group of their choice. They chose their groups for their first quiz, and then that group was maintained up until midterm. And then at midterm, I rearranged groups. And the way I rearranged is I looked for high performers and low performers, and I split up my high performers into to be kind of the heads of their group. I didn't tell them this, but I split up the high performers, and then I just sprinkled everyone else in to make sure everybody had someone that was really on top of things in their group. Cooperative quizzes are, in the literature, it says they're good for both the low performers and the high performers, because the high performers get, as they kind of teach others and tell everybody what they know, they get a deeper understanding of the material. And then the low performers benefit because they can actually learn from their peers. All right, so students can generally, I got a ton of positive feedback on the cooperative quizzes. Students across the board reported that they were engaged during cooperative quizzes and that the cooperative quizzes actually positively impacted their sense of belonging in the class. Those are 2 things that I was really interested in and really hoping cooperative quizzes would do. A lot of students reported that they prepared better for class than they would have because they didn't want to let their group down. They wanted to make sure that they showed up to actually participate in that group part of the quiz. Some of my observations, so I did record engagement, how engaged every student was during each quiz, and most students were very engaged. I did have a few that maybe super introverted students who would prefer to work alone, didn't really like the group work, but almost everybody else was very engaged during the quiz. I could tell by their body language, and I was listening in on their conversations. Students would discuss their rationale well. I would hear them saying, well, I know this, but I don't know this. And so that's a really good thing for students to be able to identify what they understand and what they actually need to get a little help with. A problem that I noticed, maybe not a problem, I don't know, topics weren't always discussed in as much depth as I had hoped. Things did stay kind of superficial at times. It also took up a lot more class time than I had anticipated. So every week I was losing 30 minutes of class time for these quizzes that I thought would be more like half of that amount of time. So that was slightly a bit of an issue. I just had to eliminate some material that I would have normally covered. Absences can turn out to be a problem. So I did have students absent. And when you have a group of 2 and one of them is not there, now you don't have a group anymore. So there were times that I did have to rearrange groups for the quiz. And the reason I saw that as a problem was because part of the group quiz is that you form relationships with your group and you feel comfortable actually like being wrong around them. So if you have, an answer that is not correct, you're not going to feel that judgment. You can be more open with them. And when you are then thrown into a group with people you don't know, you're not as comfortable. So that was the problem that I saw with absences. I did see that I need to reiterate my rules more regularly, just reminding students that participation in the quiz is important, and we didn't want those students who were not as prepared to benefit from those who were. And even here with these quizzes and the group quizzes, students were still pretty stressed out about them. So they were still pretty stressful events because they did heavily impact their grades. So I loved the two-step cooperative quiz. I got good feedback, some good data from the semester. I wanted to keep doing cooperative quizzes, but I wanted to make it more of like an engagement thing and less of an effect on students' grades. So this semester, as I was considering like how I was going to set up grades this semester, I just asked myself, like, why am I doing cooperative quizzes and what is the most important thing for me? Like, what do I want this to do for my students and for my class? And the two things that I really loved about cooperative quizzes and really wanted to use them for was getting students engaged and making them feel like they belong in the class. Like, how can I use this tool? So I took my cooperative quizzing and then just made some adjustments. I wanted to make it more relaxed so the students would see it less of a stressful event and more of like a group work event. And I think I've accomplished that this semester. It's going really well. So let me tell you what I do. All right, so I call the cooperative quizzes I'm doing this semester low stakes cooperative quizzes. So what I've been doing this semester is I'll ask students to review just some basic course material before they come to class. And so I teach anatomy and physiology, which is they're not super basic subjects, but there are basic aspects, things that are kind of like definitions or like memorization things, not really conceptual knowledge things. I'll ask them to review some of those things before they come to class. And then when they get to class, they take a group quiz right at the beginning of class on that material that they were supposed to review. This is low point, so they're only worth 5 points. And this is not a two-step quiz. So they just come in, they get a 5-point quiz, and the whole group works on it together at once. This semester, I did make my groups bigger. So I've got groups of 3 to 4. The reason I did this is because absences were a problem last semester. And so with groups of 3 to 4, I thought if somebody's absent, that's going to have less of an effect. I'm less likely to have 2 or 3 people absent from the same group. And so I'm not going to have to regroup people for their quizzes. I'm also maintaining the groups for the whole semester. So my students already have made some really like strong connections with each other. I would like to encourage that kind of cohort formation, like where they form these groups and those strong relationships. And I don't really want to break those up now. I do have a rule that quizzes cannot be made up. And I know that seems like kind of hard nosed, but what I'll do at the end of the semester is, some people will be absent sometimes. And so I'll just drop the lowest few quizzes at the end. That'll allow for a few absences through the semester. Of course, I'll be lenient on this. And so if I have a student who's been out, because they had gallbladder surgery or something, we'll figure that out. And I won't have it count against them that they missed those quizzes. I do reiterate my rules often. And in fact, I print them on every quiz. So every time I give a quiz, usually they're just like 5 or 7 questions. I give each group 1 quiz. There is a person who reads the question. And after they read the question, group members take turns stating why they think or what they think the correct answer is and their rationale. Then the group has to agree on an answer. And then another person is assigned as the recorder and they will record the answers. They change their rules every quiz, so there are different readers and recorders for every quiz. That helps to make sure that everybody is participating. Again, I remind them that everybody needs to participate at the beginning of every quiz. And of course, the threat is if I don't see you participating, we're going to take these quizzes individually. And so far, that has worked. All right, now so far, I have really great reports from students on these quizzes. They perceive, so I do surveys on my students all the time, and they perceive that the quizzes are benefiting their learning. So I'll hear students have come in my office and told me about this too, that they, when they're talking with their group about things, their group will help them identify things that they're mixed up on, things that they're not understanding, and they can help clarify those ideas for them. I've had the quote, I'm actually talking to people in my class. This is the first time that's ever happened. And so I think that engagement piece is really important. I have a really wonderful student. She said, I wasn't sure about this at the beginning of the semester, but now I love it. I love the way this class goes. So my observation so far this semester, I have classes with the most engagement I've ever had. And I have made other changes to my classes, but this is the thing, like this, it's not a magic bullet, but this is like the thing that I think has contributed the most to the interactions that I'm seeing. So I have 3 sections of anatomy that I'm doing these cooperative quizzes in. When I get to class, the class is loud. Everybody is talking. They don't even like notice when I arrive, and I am totally fine with that because I want them to like each other and I want them to talk to each other. They're extremely interactive. I haven't noticed that the quizzes have improved performance on exams or anything, but I do notice that the classroom climate is significantly improved. And I think the reason cooperative quizzes help contribute to this is because from day 2 of the semester, that's when I started these quizzes. From day 2, I established that group work would be happening in my class, that your grade would be linked to your group work. And then almost every day we have a quiz. And every day I'm establishing this very clear link between group work and their grade. And so I think that kind of in the beginning forced them to cooperate and forced them to engage, but now they're friends with their group members. And so I think now it doesn't feel forced. And that's why, like, they're friends. They have reported to me that they study with each other outside of class. They text outside of class. They talk to each other outside of class. And that is really what I wanted. I wanted students to make connections with each other. And if they do that in my class, then they're more likely to come to class and succeed in my class. All right. Do you guys have any questions?
I love this idea so much. English 095 is kind of being like revamped into a thing that is merging kind of sort of with 101, and like the strictly online versions might be a little different going forward. And because I was listening to you talk yesterday and I was like, oh man, I wish we had tests. And then I thought, oh no, 095 has tests. So I think I'm gonna try to do this next semester and I'm really excited for it. Thank you for sharing it, Megan.
You're welcome. And the grades, so I didn't mention as much the grading aspect of my low stakes cooperative quizzes, but it's just like part of their participation grade. So every day in my class is worth a certain number of points. The quiz just becomes part of that participation grade in the end. So I think it takes the edge off and the nervousness maybe of taking a quiz like almost every day in class. That if you come, you participate, and you work with your group, most of the time, you know, they're doing really great on those quizzes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you said that they're like texting each other outside of class and all that stuff too. I think that's fantastic. That really ties into with a lot of what Hannah was talking about because you know they're doing stuff outside of class, they're doing stuff in class, and it's just a larger community that we're helping to foster, and that's really special. Anybody have any questions or anything about any of the content that we've gone over? I can try my best to answer questions on Hannah and Scott's behalf, or if anybody has questions for Megan. Okay. Okay, if not, that's fine. If you have questions later, like Scott mentioned, definitely make sure to reach out to your peers, to your colleagues, because we're all one big community. They're trying to make this work as best we can. I'm sure you're sick of seeing this QR code, but it is here at the very end of every single CETL session, in person and online. So if you could, please fill out this brief evaluation survey. All of the evaluation surveys go to the facilitators, so that we can make sure that, future sessions are doing what they need to do. We can see what's working, what's not working, etc. So thank you so much for attending. I'm going to leave this up on the screen for a minute or two just in case anybody needs it. But otherwise, I am going to go ahead and turn our recording off. And I thank you guys for being here.